above ground storage organ, such as a seed, like legumes or grains, then that amyloplast or starch granule would look different. It would be about a third the size, and it would be kind of octagonal or have square sides to it. So they look different. All of these starch granules look different depending upon the plant that makes them. They're very characteristic. Now, when you take these plant parts and you store a lot of starch in them, then I call these plant parts starches. And so here's an underground storage organ known as sweet potatoes. That's a starch. An underground storage organ called potatoes. That's a starch. You know, underground, it stores the energy for the plant. Above ground storage organs, various seeds that are high in carbohydrate, like legumes and grains. Those are above ground storage organs. This is not starch. These are non-starchy, orange, green, and yellow, primarily perishable vegetables. You cannot live on these. There's not enough energy. If you were going to live on cabbage, you'd have to eat 10, 15, 20 pounds a day. You don't have that kind of jaw energy or time to do that. So these plant parts are not starches. They're non-starchy vegetables. This has a lot of energy in it, but the energy is simple sugars, so they metabolize quickly and they don't last a long time in your body to satisfy the hunger drive and provide long-term energy needs. So you can get energy from these in large amounts, fruits, but it doesn't last long. It's not the same as starch, which are chains of sugar, long chains of sugar. This is not starch. There is no starch at all in any animal food, at all. There are two animal foods that contain sugar. Those are milk, which Brendan Davis talked about, and honey. And the sugars are made by the plants and then stored by the bees or the cows in these particular parts that the bee or the cow makes, the milk or the honey. This is starch. Can you see this? Starch. 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 This is starch. Starch. Sweet potato, starch. Starch. Do you like these pictures? I'm sure you like this. I'm sure this really causes you to salivate. Very pleasurable thoughts. And there's a reason why you like this. A very fundamental reason, and that is because that's your food. You see, that's what people are supposed to eat. That's why you have this reaction to it. I'm not going to do it, but I could show you a picture of a slaughterhouse. And you would not react positively. You'd be sickened by it. Why? Because that's not your food. Now, I have a cat. His name is Einstein. And my cat Einstein, if I took him to a slaughterhouse, what do you think would happen? Yeah, he'd jump all over the carcasses, wouldn't it? Because that's his food. He likes that. He's designed to eat that food. That's not your food. That's why you don't like it. The reason you like this is because it's your food. Starch. Starch. I mean, I could live on beans and rice. I really could. In fact, we practically do these days, live on beans and rice and a little bit of chard or something out of the garden Mary throws in the dish, and that's a big part of our diet. Starch. I received a letter from a friend. She sent me this letter, and she said, what I love best about your focus on starch in this lecture right here, is that it's much simpler for me to understand than focusing on carbs, proteins, and fats. I know what a starch is. I can recognize that food easily, and I can grow starchy foods in my gardens. But how do I grow a protein, a carb, or a fat? Those explanations were always too far removed from what I see on my plate. You need to understand this terminology. You need to be able to focus on what you're supposed to do to take proper action. You're supposed to eat starch. You're designed as a starch eater. The tip of your tongue tastes with pleasure sugar. That's the only calorie that the tongue tastes with pleasure. It tastes fat. But if you can recognize fat, then you're likely to be a thin person. If your tongue is not sensitive to fat, then you're likely fat. So the only pleasurable calorie the tongue tastes is sugar, which is starch. My cat Einstein, however, if you check his tongue out, he has taste buds for amino acids, proteins. He has no taste buds for sweet. It's because starch is not his diet. His diet is meat. The body is designed anatomically, physiologically to survive in its best health, and so one of the ways to survive best is to be drawn to what is right and to be rewarded by doing the right thing. Starch is clean. It has virtually no carbohydrate. It's low fat. 1 to 8% of the, virtually no cholesterol. It's low fat. 1 to 8% of the calories are fat. It's clean in terms of microbes. You hear all the time, I forget what the last one was, a couple weeks ago, what was it, listeria and something? Peanut butter, listeria peanut butter. Last year it was listeria and cantaloupes, and about 3 years ago you couldn't buy tomatoes at Taco Bell because they're full of salmonella. That's what they said. And then the Odwalla apples from Seattle that killed a couple of kids about 15 years ago. Always it's a plant that's identified with these organisms, but plants will not grow any of these organisms at all, ever. They're contaminants. They're contaminants from animals. These are animal-derived organisms. They always come from animals, never from plants. But the plant is always identified in the press so that you believe there's nothing safe to eat. You read the stories, say, about the cantaloupes that are infected with listeria in Europe, and then a couple months later somebody says, oh, by the way, that was caused by a cow walking through the field making doo-doo all over the plants. Or some farm worker making doo-doo on your tomatoes or something. It always comes from animals. And the reason that these animal-derived viruses, bacteria, prions, parasites are a threat to you is because you're an animal. So it could cross the systems easily. Whereas the plant kingdom is so different from the animal kingdom that you can't catch plant diseases. None of you have friends with tobacco mosaic virus or Dutch elm disease or aphids, because your systems are so different. So when anybody tells you that there is an infection in your broccoli or garlic or tomatoes, you look where the poop is, and you will find out where it came from, because that's where it always comes from. So starches are clean. They're also clean in chemicals, but most of you understand about the food chain, how you biomagnify environmental chemicals because they're fat soluble, and so the top of your food chain, which is your animal foods, are going to be loaded with DDT, PCB, heptachlor, etc. So if you want clean food, you eat starches, is what you do for your energy. Starches are also complete nutrition. They're loaded with protein. The most rapid time of growth in your life is when you're a baby. That diet ideally is breast milk, which is 5% protein. Sweet potatoes are 6%, rice is 8%, potatoes are 10%, beans are 28%. In other words, starches are loaded with protein. You'd never have a problem with protein. The protein needs of human beings are so low that it shouldn't even be considered as a nutrient because it's impossible to reach that low level based upon natural plant foods, starches. But industry and the public focuses on protein because of unique positioning that industry does. It picks one of its nutrients in its product and it advertises that nutrient so that calcium has become synonymous with dairy, yes, and protein is synonymous with meat, and iron is synonymous with beef, and so on. Omega-3 fats are synonymous with fish. It's because the industries that sell these things that make billions of dollars, they see that their product's really high in this one nutrient, so they convince dietitians, the USDA, doctors, public, etc., through massive advertising that this is the most important nutrient in your body, yet it is virtually impossible to design a protein-deficient diet based on plant foods. You can't do it. Our needs are so low. All right, so how complete are the nutrients in plants? We're going to have this March. We run advanced study weekends twice a year, and the next one is March 1 through 3. And one of our guests is a guy named Voigt. You may have heard of this fella. He's a Washington Potato Commissioner. He got upset a couple of years ago because the USDA, they made a rule for the school lunch programs that you couldn't serve any more than 1 cup of starch per student per week. And a branch of the USDA, which is the WIC program, they banned one food from the coupons that are given in the WIC program for women, infants, and children. I mean, you can buy bacon bits and oil and sour cream and beef jerky, but you cannot buy a potato with the WIC program. That was the rule in January 2011. So Voigt got upset, and he decided to go on an all-potato diet, and he lost about 30 pounds, dropped his cholesterol more than 30 points, and got his health back, just by eating potatoes and water. And I think he thinks that was an original experiment. I'll ask him when he comes in March to our advanced study weekend, but that was not original. It's been done many, many times in experiments as well as in natural history. People have had to live on potatoes. That's all was available, was potatoes. This study published in 1928 in the Biochemical Journal by a guy named Kahn. He took a 28-year-old woman and a 25-year-old man who were marathon runners, and he housed them in a situation where he could control all the food, and what he fed them was potatoes. And he watched them for 6 months. They had to add a little oil to the diet because this man and woman got too thin because they were physically active. They were runners. So he added oil, which diluted the nutritional content of the potato. Oil has no protein, vitamins, minerals, etc. It just diluted the nutritional content of the potato. When you read this study, it'll be the first thing that comes up on Google when you type in all-potato diet and Kahn, K-O-N. When you read this study, you'll find two statements at the end that I think are profound. One is there was no desire for change. They did not tire of the all-potato diet. I can relate to that. My favorite food when I was growing up was mashed potatoes, peas and corn, and a brown gravy. Of course, the brown gravy today is a lot different than the brown gravy back then, but it was still one of my favorite foods. I could live on an all-potato diet. And the other thing you'll read at the end of this paper is that they were in excellent health, deriving their nutrients and their protein from potatoes alone, published in 1928. That I'm sure doesn't surprise a lot of you. Okay, now let me talk to you about why I know that we should eat a starch-based diet. It's because we always have. We've always have eaten a starch-based diet. All large, successful populations of people, without exception, all large, successful, trim, healthy populations of people throughout all of verifiable human history have obtained the bulk of their calories from starch. Let's go over it again. All large, successful populations of people, no exceptions. I mean, if you have an exception, tell me. I've been talking about this for several years, and so far I've heard of no exceptions. Oh, Eskimo. All large, successful populations of people. The Eskimo is a primitive population, a small band of people. Now, they're living on the extremes of the environment on the Atkins diet for 7 months of the year. Throughout all of verifiable human history, have obtained the bulk of their calories from starch. That's just the way it's always been. For 14,000 years, 50,000 years, 105,000 years, 250,000 years. I mean, we have evidence going back a long time. Like, for example, you have this particular structure that was found in the center of the village, in a village that was discovered in the Dead Sea. And the purpose of this was to store the barley, which is the primary source of nutrition in the Middle East at least 11,000 years ago. The Middle East, that area of the world, was known as the bread basket because they lived on barley and wheat. The Aztecs and the Mayan civilizations lasted between 800 and 1,300 years. These are known as the people of the corn. Yeah, they lived on corn. That was their diet, was corn, and a few vegetables and a couple human hearts here and there. In millet, in Africa it was millet. In Asia it's been rice. In Egypt, wheat, barley. In South America, potatoes. The Incas lived on potatoes. In Peru today, there are over 400 different species of potatoes known, and they are still potato eaters in Peru. The Incas lived on potatoes until they went to battle, and then they switched to quinoa because they thought it would give them more strength. In ancient villages, populations in the Andes, they prepared freeze-dried potatoes for times when things were difficult. They would take the potato, harvest it at night because they were in the mountains. It would freeze in the daytime. It would dry, and they made freeze-dried potatoes called chuño, which they would store for as long as 10 years in dry places. And so when times are tough, the village survived on freeze-dried potatoes thousands of years ago. If you look around the world, you'll find in various populations throughout history, and even today, about half the world still lives on starch-based diets. you will find that all large, successful populations of people have lived on starch-based diets. That is a very good argument as to why you're a starch eater. But that's not what archaeology says to some people. Some people say, no, we were hunter-gatherers with an emphasis on hunting. Especially the paleo people tell you this. And I've written some critiques about the paleo diet that you might be interested in reading from my website. But the reason old ancient archaeologists, those were the 70 years ago, 150 years ago, the reason they considered us hunter-gatherers with an emphasis on hunting is they went to the village, dug around the fire pit, they found bones and stone tools, and cut from the stone tools on the bones, and that's why they said that we were basically meat eaters. They found no orange peels after 50,000 years, no corn husks, no potato peels, and that is why you look at the scientific research and discussions among archaeologists, that's why they made such a huge mistake. It's because they looked at the bones and tools. Modern archaeology is more sophisticated, and they look for other details in these sites that would indicate more reliably what we used to eat. Like, for example, in this population in East Africa, in Mozambique, they dug around the village site, which was dated to 105,000 years ago, and what they found were these. You know what these are, right? Starch granules. They're starch grains, they're amyloplasts. And that's what they found. Concluding that people 105,000 years ago lived on starches. This is a fun one. This is from 44,000 years ago from the Neanderthals. Multiple skeletons of Neanderthals from the cold northern Atlantic to the warm Mediterranean were examined, and they looked for evidence of what they ate between their teeth, and they found these between the teeth of the Neanderthal. Remember, the Neanderthal is the fiercest hunter around, so they think, but that's not true. They found these between the teeth, which indicated, and by the way, these are cooked starch granules. These are modern-day cooked starch granules. They found cooked starch granules between the teeth of Neanderthals. When this study came out of 3 areas in Western Europe, in Czechoslovakia, in Italy, and in Russia, they found 3 separate sites, and on the tools, what they found were these starch granules, and the headlines around the world were the end of the paleo diet, because it proved this theory was untrue. These people are lying, and they know they're lying because they know the archaeology as well as I do. Starch eaters. This is one place where we had organic material preserved. This is a site 150 miles south of Santiago, Chile. And the reason that they preserved organic materials, it's a peat bog. The peat covered up the village. And they found evidence of potato eating 14,000 years ago. They have found 44 different kinds of edible plants and 22 different kinds of medicinal plants. This is a site in western Peru where they found 7 skeletons. They looked between their teeth. There's their teeth right here. They looked between the teeth and they found these. In fact, it's so characteristic, the starch granules, you can tell exactly what starches these people ate. They found evidence of potato eating, bean eating, various grains that they could identify. Thanks to global warming, we're making all kinds of new discoveries. With the glaciers melting, we're finding evidence that was long buried by snow. Like in the Alps in northern Italy, we found this guy who's known as the Iceman. He's 5,000 years old. When they found him, they found his bow and arrow, concluding that he was a hunter. They found some animal food in his gut. But when they analyzed his hair, which is an extremely reliable indicator of what long-term eating patterns are, they declared this man a vegan. He lived on wheat. Oh, I like this one. This is really fun. You may want to look this one up on the internet and show it to some of your macho male friends who are trying to be tough and strong. This is evidence about gladiators that was discovered. These men lived 1,800 years ago. They found a burial site in Ephesus in Turkey. We found this burial site. It was 200 square foot plot. They dug it up. The first thing they noticed is they were all males. They found shields and tridents and swords with these skeletons, these 60 skeletons that were buried. So they knew they were gladiators. And then they analyzed their bones and they determined that they were vegan, which fits in with the historical accounts of gladiators who are known as the barley men. They lived on barley. Barley was their diet, a few beans. They ate virtually no meat. Why? Because it's bad form to lose in the Colosseum. You need to have strength and endurance, and they knew back then that you got strength and endurance from eating starch. And if you compared skeletons and burial sites outside of this particular one, you could see from their bones that they ate some animal food, but not these people, because they wanted to win. Now, it's kind of interesting when you read this story or you watch it. There's a documentary that you can watch, an hour-long documentary about this excavation. And what the archaeologists say is that this is the first evidence that we have that gladiators were obese. Now, why did they say that? Because everybody knows starches make you fat, and they had concrete evidence these people lived on starch. So they must have been obese, so they carried on their theory, and they said, well, we hypothesize, we theorize why they were obese. It's because it made a better show. If you took obese men and put them in the arena, you could cut them and they would bleed and the show would go on without them dying. Well, you know, I went looking for obese gladiators, and I could find mosaics from 1,800 years ago, and these are some of the mosaics that I found. This guy's kind of big, but I think these are muscles. I couldn't find any obese gladiators. Not a one. I have no doubt that these men lived on barley, though, because they wanted to win. The Roman soldiers asked their leaders to take meat out of their diet before battle. Why? They wanted to win. And the greatest conquests in the world were accomplished by men who were fueled by starch. Like Alexander the Great conquered the known world on corn, not maize. Corn is wheat, barley, and rice and other grains. Conquered the known world on starch. And Genghis Khan did the same thing. His army conquered the known world on starch. Now, when I wrote that, I published a book this year called The Starch Solution. I know that's a suicidal title, but I just wanted to take everything and throw it on the table to win and lose. So when that book went out, somebody wrote me and said their wife read the book and she got out through the first 20 pages, and then she ran across the comment I made that Genghis Khan's army lived on starch. And she said, well, that's not true. Everybody knows they lived on yogurt and other dairy products and meat. And I said, that's not true. If I prove to your wife it's not true, would she finish the book? So I sent her this article, which is an article that studied the remains of people at that particular area of the world in the time of Genghis Khan. And they tell you, according to common opinion, ancient Mongols were mainly meat eaters, sometimes even raw, but that's not what they found. That's not what they found. 50,000 different kinds of plants. 4 major starches in these excavation sites. Genghis Khan and his army lived on starch. It couldn't be any other ways. I mean, you just think about an army of hundreds of thousands of men going through a landscape and getting their fuel from animals. They would starve to death. What do modern gladiators eat? What do people eat who run the races, the long race, and win? Since 1968, who's won the long-distance Olympic races? The Kenyans and the Ethiopians. And what is their diet? Starch, corn, and millet, and beans. Yeah, so even modern gladiators live on starch. So you have these friends at home, men and women, who are trying to build bodies and be really macho. You just tell them the toughest, strongest men and women in the world live on starch. Always have, always will. All right, I told you there's problems out there that need to be solved. Serious problems with health care, environmental destruction, horrible things that we need to solve right now. What can we do by introducing a whole new concept, a whole old concept? Eating the American diet of animal foods, meat and dairy is something new. It was something that only very wealthy people ever did in the past. Now everybody's wealthy, so people are eating this diet and they've accepted it as the norm, but it's never been the norm before among the populations of people. So if we get people to rethink old ways of doing things and get clues about what the truth is, that we could change the world. We could change healthcare overnight. I just finished, as I told you, taking care of 50 people this morning with diabetes and rheumatoid arthritis and ulcerative colitis and obesity and so on. 50 people, without exception, showed remarkable improvements in 10 days. No, we didn't solve all their problems in 10 days, but they knew after the 10 days that they didn't have to be sick any longer. I stopped 95% of their medications. They could see hope for the future. You can understand how this works very simply. Let me tell you a story about one of the restaurant visits Mary and I had around 20 years ago. It was in Hawaii at a restaurant called John McDougal. Great little place. It's gone now. You can't go. But we're sitting at that restaurant, Mary and I, and my son, who, by the way, became a board-certified internist this week. Yeah. We were sitting at this restaurant together, and this lady walked up to the camera and said, "I'd like to take your family's picture." And I said, "No, thank you." But I thought, well, could you take a picture of that family over there for me? And she went over and took a picture of this family, these Japanese-speaking ladies who were eating mostly rice and vegetables. She came back and sold it to me for $10. And I thought, well, that was pretty cool. I wonder if I could do that again. So after making the transaction with her, I said, "You see that family over there? Would you go take a picture of that family for me? These are Japanese people, too. They're just third and fourth generation. And they're speaking pidgin English." What happened? What happened to these people? Did the genes change? Did they catch a virus? What happened? They stopped eating rice, is what happened. And they started eating meat. You must eat. You're looking for energy. You have a choice as to where you get that energy. You get it from starches, or you can get it from dairy and meat. These people got it from starches. These people didn't. All right, the reason people are sick in our society is because they eat like kings and queens. We live in the richest times ever known for the human race. As a result, people eat in mass. In the billions, people eat the diet that was once reserved for kings and queens. As I see it through past history, what happened, well, let's just take us way back. We've got a couple of minutes. Let's take us way back to 105,000 years ago in some societies, longer in other societies, certainly far longer ago than 10,000 years ago, which people say is the dawn of civilization, the beginning of agriculture. Agriculture began far before that. So we have people who are hunting and gathering, which has been the nature of human beings, is hunt and gather. With hunting and gathering, they had to spend their whole day doing this or the family starved to death. It's a difficult job to get enough calories for the family, and so that's all hunter-gatherers did, was just look for food, and they had no time to do anything else but find the calories necessary to keep the family alive. Maybe in the late evening they could draw a little stick drawing on the cave wall, but that's all they had time for. All their energy was put into getting enough calories to keep the family alive. And then what happened is people became aware that there were some plants that were particularly tasty and easy to grow. So they started growing those plants close to their homes, and more calories became available. That was the dawn of civilization. When excess calories became available, then you had a situation where not everybody had to work all the day long to get the food. There were some people freed up from those tasks that could do other things. And civilization developed. Some people, instead of hunting and gathering all day long for food, they could become soldiers and politicians and artists and musicians. And as time went on, we became more efficient at gathering calories, and we could take some of those plant-derived calories and we could feed them to animals like pigs and pheasants. And we could feed those pigs and pheasants to the pharaohs and the priestesses, the kings and the queens of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago. And these kings and queens, you know from their remains from the mummies, they were sick. They had horrible atherosclerosis and obesity and gallbladder disease. And you analyze their hair and you find out they ate exactly what Americans eat. And as time went on, more and more people could afford to eat like kings and queens. And then we had the midst of the Industrial Revolution about 150 years ago, and we discovered fossil fuel, which was good because we stopped killing the whales for the oil. So So we discovered fossil fuel, and as a result of fossil fuel in the Industrial Revolution, we became extremely efficient at getting calories. So now one person sitting on a tractor can grow enough food to meet the needs of 3,000 people. So 2,999 of us do other things than gather food. We are civilized. We are artists and musicians and politicians and writers and speakers and doctors and so on. That's how civilization developed, because of availability and accessibility of calories. Back in the old days, there were only a few people who were rich enough to be kings and queens. The common person, they would eat their usual food of barley and rice and corn and potatoes and so on. And 2 or 3, 4 times a year, they'd have a celebration. And at those times, the common folk would kill a pig and roast it over a fire or throw a chicken in the pot of vegetable stew. And they had a great old time at these festivals, these parties. The common person couldn't only do that once or twice or 3 times a year. The rich people said, oh, this is so much fun, let's do it every day. And they walked up to their castle, and what they did is they ended up feasting, having festivals all day long, like Americans. Americans and the old kings and queens, they would start out the morning with Easter. And we have, for lunch and dinner, we have Thanksgiving and Christmas, and every night after dinner we have a birthday party. It is that kind of behavior that's caused Americans to look like kings and queens. Okay, that's why people are sick. All right, so let's reverse this experiment. Say we take these fat, sick people. Let's just take these people here, but you know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about, we're talking about 70% of the people you know. That's what the overweight and obesity rate is now in our country. So we take these fat, sick people, and we buy them a one-way ticket to Japan. And we feed them rice and vegetables, and we have them work in the farming village. These people who are fat and sick would end up looking like the other people who are thin and healthy. Now, how often do you think that would happen if we sent these people over to Japan and had them eat rice and vegetables? You think that would happen 7% of the time? 33.4% of the time? 72.7% of the time? 89% of the time? How about 100% of the time? Yeah, 100% of the time that happens. So you want to solve the healthcare problems in this country due to feasting 4 times a day? It's very simple. This was done because it had to be done, and it relates to what's been going on now. We're in the midst of the greatest drought ever known to the human race. They tell us somewhere between 50 and 80% of the corn and soybeans are gone in the Midwest of the United States, and there are actually predictions that by 2050, people will be forced to be vegetarians. This country, you as an individual, the world needs to think about getting calories. This happened also during World War I, is because of unchosen circumstances, because of dire situations, people had to make adaptations in World War I. For example, in Denmark, they had to change their diet because during World War I, Britain and Germany were at war, and the North Sea, which is between Britain and Germany, which is also affects the country of Denmark, the North Sea, the Britons put up a blockade to starve the Germans. And they did. They starved the Germans. 400,000 Germans suffered from malnutrition or died from starvation. This guy, Michael Hinhede, was a physician and nutritionist in Denmark in the 1800s and 1900s. He was also the head of Denmark's Nutrition Research Committee, and he was the advisor to the Danish government during World War II. Now, Hinhede had done some experiments. He'd done experiments on people like, he would raise people on just grains and water with a little bit of oil, or in this case, medicine. He was raised for 1.5 years on potatoes and margarine alone. That's all he got. And he didn't look malnourished. They knew back then, 100 years ago, it was impossible to reach a level of protein that was too low, so they didn't even consider it in their nutritional analysis. So what Hinhede did as the advisor of the Danish government of 3,000 people in Denmark is he decided that they weren't going to starve to death. Instead, they were going to starve the pigs and cows. They stopped feeding the pigs and cows the corn, the potatoes, the soybeans. And as a consequence, the people in Denmark during World War I did not go hungry. They thrived. 400,000 Germans who thought that the way to do it was to keep the well-rounded, well-balanced diet and keep growing the meat, 400,000 of them starved to death or suffered malnutrition under the same circumstances. So Hinhidi made this decision for Denmark, and everybody had plenty to eat during the entire war. During the last part of the war, when the restrictions of the blockade was most severe, not only did they have enough to eat, they got healthy. And we see that from a publication in the Journal of the American Medical Association about what happened during the war. You see, during the war years, this is death from all diseases, and this is death from chronic diseases. What happened during the war is these were the death rates, and then the blockade came about and food restrictions became more severe in that part of the world, and the Danish, they stopped eating pigs. In fact, only the farmers occasionally got pigs, and nobody got cows to eat, except for the very, very, very rich people in Denmark. 3 million people we're talking about. And they saw a profound drop, a 34% reduction in death rate in Denmark in the last 2 years. This has never been seen in Denmark before. It happened, by the way, in all Western European countries in World War I and World War II. Heart disease virtually disappeared. New cases of diabetes stopped occurring. People with diabetes stopped having complications. New cases of MS stopped occurring. They stopped having complications of multiple sclerosis, and so on, when people had to eat the animals' food, the corn, the beans, the grains, and so on. So we could learn from Hinhidi's work. We don't have to starve as a country. The world doesn't have to starve. We just have to stop eating the animals. That's all we have to do to regain great health. Here's the results during World War II, diabetes in England and Wales, World War I and World War II. Here's the death rate from diabetes. Here's World War I starting here in 1914, ended in 1918. You see a dramatic reduction in death rate from diabetes. World War I ends, death rate from diabetes increases. World War II comes about. Again, they couldn't eat the animals because they couldn't afford to because of the restrictions that occurred during World War II caused by the Nazi Germans, and a dramatic reduction in the death rate from diabetes, heart disease, etc. We could learn lessons from the past so that we can brighten our future, and that lesson is we need to live on starch. So I run a program, I just finished it this morning, and it's at a resort in Santa Rosa. That program is based on food. It's food. We do a little exercise. We don't do any meditation. I give medical care. We stop people's medications. That's right. We focus on food. Let me give you an example. Einstein. Remember my cat Einstein? Okay. So here we have Einstein, a little cat, and I know it's going to upset some of you, particularly those of you who are very concerned about animal rights. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start feeding Einstein baked potatoes. And so I throw 2 or 3 baked potatoes on the ground for Einstein. What does he do? Bats him around, looks at him, and starves to death because he's not going to eat those potatoes because that's not his food. So I know this is the part that will upset you, but what I do next is I grind up the potatoes, put a nasogastric tube down, and force feed him the potatoes. And then 2 weeks later, Einstein is all sick and disgusting and really in terrible shape. So I think about the ways that I can make him better based upon what you hear about what causes good health and bad health. So the first thing I do is I put a collar on Einstein and take him for a walk. And I bring it back, and I look at him, and I go, well, that didn't help. So then I take and reach down and pet Einstein, scratch his ears, and give him some psychological comfort. Now, how do you make Einstein well? You put him back on the meat. He's a carnivore. So you got all these friends of yours that are sick and fat. The problem's the food. It's not because they don't get enough exercise, which has some advantages, but it's risky at times, too. It's not because they don't have adequate psychological comfort. It's the food. That's why they're sick. And how do you get them well? You change their diet. Here's the results. It's the largest study ever done that we're in the process of publishing. Nothing else is ever close in data. What I did is I took the results of 10 years of my people at the resort we work at now. I'd done the same thing on 2,000 people at St. Helena Hospital when I was there for 16 years, and I published those results on 500 of them in a medical journal. But we're redoing it now, and we're checking these 1,700 people that came through our program over 10 years. No one was excluded from the data. Everybody is included in this data of 1,700 people. Force feeding these people. They have 15, 20-course buffets 3 times a day. They can take food back to their room. They can eat as much as they want. And the average weight loss in women is 3.1 pounds in 7 days. That's about a half a pound a day. The bigger you are, the faster you lose. Minutes, 3.6 pounds. 1,700 people. Our drops in cholesterol, the average is 22.3 points of cholesterol. This program that ended this morning, the average drop was 25 points of cholesterol. In 7 days, we did nothing else but change their food. High cholesterols, you have bigger drops. You can drop 100 points in 7 days sometimes. The higher your cholesterol is when you start, the greater drop you'll get. This is our blood pressure drops. These are the people who should be treated with blood pressure medication, 160 over 100. The average drop in blood pressure in 7 days is 24 over 14 millimeters of mercury, and almost all of them stopped their medication. I've done long-term studies, like I took care of the people at Blue Cross Blue Shield for 3 years in Minnesota, and we were able to follow them up for a year. And what we found was that they got an average of 36-pound weight loss for those who complied with the diet who were overweight in a year. We just finished a study at Oregon Health and Science University up in Portland. I started a study in 2009 with the neurology department at Oregon Health and Science University Medical School in Portland. And we just finished it this March. And we're going to release the data on diet and MS soon. Not yet. But we do have some of the secondary endpoints, and it's just shocked the folks at Oregon Health and Science University what they saw. And that is, we took one group, which is the intervention group, which came to our clinic and learned the diet, and another group, which is the control group, who were asked to eat the regular diet for a year. And we looked at what happened. And what happened was the fat intake on average dropped from 40% to 15%, and it stayed that way for a year. Nobody's ever seen that kind of compliance. Over 80% of people complied fully after a proper education. So don't tell me that people won't do it if given the right information. They will. We know it. We have proof that they will do it. Let's take a look at some of the patients I've taken care of. This guy right here, or have know it through email. This guy right here was the CFO of the state of Wisconsin, sick with the usual problems, blood pressure pills, antidepressants, decided to change his diet. This is what happened to him. This is 40-pound weight loss, 7 months. This lady had horrible rheumatoid arthritis. Anyway, she got cured. This guy, patient of mine from, some of you are from Hawaii. I know that Elaine and Jerry probably remember this guy. This was over 30 years ago. This guy changed his diet. He was on 25 drugs. He was 450 pounds, changed his diet. And that's what happened. And that was 35 years ago. This guy's one of our newer patients. There's his picture. Here he is. Before he changed his diet, he's on diabetic medication. He's 276 pounds in May of 2011. Here's what happened to his blood sugar as soon as he changed his diet. Bloop, like this, off all his medication. Here he is 90 days later, down 30 pounds, and here he is this January. How often does this happen? How often does this happen? This is as close as a half a bottle of whiskey and a hangover. That's what it is. This lady, I'm just going to show you a lot of people that are in the Starch Solution book that have made these dramatic changes and have maintained them for years. Why do they maintain them for years? Because they're not doing anything. They're not being hungry, which is painful. They're not making themselves sick with the paleo and Atkins diets. They're just eating human beings' natural diet. Human beings are starch eaters. That's all they did. They didn't think good thoughts. They didn't go to church an extra time on Sunday. They didn't carry around good luck charms. They didn't, put cayenne pepper on their food, or, all they did was change the food. You could do that. This guy right here is from Hawaii. You folks know him. Sure you do. And this is what he looks like. Lost 150 pounds. This lady 20 years ago lost 110 pounds. This lady 4 years ago lost 149 pounds. Took her 2 years. But this lady wanted to go to Costa Rica, which wouldn't and couldn't because she was 77 pounds overweight. So we do a trip twice a year to Costa Rica, and she finally went. She was able to go on the zip lines. And she still looks like that today. This lady 10 years ago changed her diet. This is what happened to her. And she'll never be overweight. It's happened to many of you. You know what I'm talking about. This is one of the newest Star McDougalers, dramatic drop in weight. Just by, all she did was change the food. That's all you got to do is change the food. This is the newest Star McDougal. This is a lady who got breast cancer all over her body. She came to see us, and I don't know whether the cancer's cured, but she sure looks a lot better. She just changed the food. She thinks it's cured. Her doctors think it's cured, but I don't know. Just change your food. That's all you do. How often does this happen? It always happens. All you got to do is change the food. Just get the oil out of the diet. Nuts and seeds should go too, folks. And eat starch with a few vegetables and fruits. That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do. So it's up to you. This is your choice. You can continue to suffer from being overweight and sick, Or you could fix the problem. The problem's the food. And all you have to do is change the source of calories. There's nothing else. Instead of getting calories from these foods, you just get calories from these foods. And he knew it worked. He tested it on 3 million people. I know it works. I've taken care of over 5,000 people. It always works. Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you. And please spread the message. You know, go out and get in people's faces and tell them they don't have to be sick. We don't have to face a dying planet. We can fix this. All right.
No, don't just back off.